Welcome into 11warriors.com web report. Beau, Dan, James. Dwayne Haskins comes into spring in most of our eyes as the favorite to win the job. By all accounts, he didn't lose it, and yet there's still no word on when someone will be the job. And we feel that's important because honesty with Joe Burrow is important because he's got a timeline here where he's going to transfer. Dan, why have we not, if he's not the guy, why have we not had a name yet? Why is Haskins, what's taken so long, Urban?
I think because it really has been a neck-and-neck race all spring between Dwayne Haskins and Joe Burrow. I mean, Urban has been adamant all spring if there's been little separation, and I think even watching the spring game on Saturday, I think Joe Burrow had a little better game than Dwayne Haskins and kind of showed why Dwayne Haskins hasn't pulled away with that job yet. So I think it really is a close race. I would bet there's even probably dissenting opinions on the coaching staff. There's probably people who think it should be Dwayne Haskins and it should be Joe Burrow. So I know they're having meetings probably as we speak, probably this week, to try to figure out how to proceed forward at that position. But I don't think there's an obvious answer here, and I think that's why we haven't heard anything yet. But I do agree, I think they are going to have to make some sort of decision this week, because when they have exit interviews with these quarterbacks, they do need to be honest with Joe Burrow about whether he's got a chance to be the starting quarterback of his team, because if not, Joe has openly said that he's going to probably look to graduate transfer and so that he can go play somewhere.
So this is the other part that's really interesting about this, James, is that Joe Burrow holds a lot of cards and that he is graduating. And he said on Saturday that he took more classes to make sure that he could graduate. So he's going to graduate. He can leave unencumbered if he wants to at the end of this semester and go play anywhere he wants. Tate Martell has only been here 1 year, has a red shirt. We can agree, I think, that he's not in the mix to be the starter, but there will be a package for him. Haskins doesn't hold many cards at all, and that he's kind of stuck here one way or the other. Burrow, by the way, would take the least adjustment from the offensive staff. They could just run what they ran last year with Burrow because he has a better arm than JT, but is a very similar quarterback. So you can see why all these things are swirling, but also the sense of urgency that has to be there from the staff. This is a tricky week for them.
Absolutely it is, and I think, you know, and you have to make the decision quick, like Dan mentioned, because Joe Burrow's going to need to know. I mean, graduation's coming up in a month, month and a half, whatever it might be. You need to make your decision, and you need to let, I think it's too, this is a position where you got to have leadership, and this is a position where the team needs to know who they're going to be with. So they need to know who's going to have this job. Obviously, I think they'd love to have Dwayne and Joe both compete into fall camp, but I just don't think, especially with Joe's situation, I just don't think that's a realistic expectation at this point. So I think you need to make a decision here in the next week. Or is it Joe? Is it Dwayne? That way your team, not only the players, but the coaching staff knows, okay, how are we going to run this offense? What's this offense going to look like when we come in for the first day of fall camp?
Also in the spring game, as playmakers go, DeMario McCall-Flash. He's been a site favorite for years. His personality is effervescent. He wears number 30, which always feels like a penalty because I know he wanted to wear a single digit. They keep him in 30. It feels like they don't trust him, and yet he's got explosiveness. And frankly, from a position group that lacks it, he has it. Has he had a good enough spring? And then more importantly, maybe, will he have a good enough summer to make sure they trust him in the fall?
Well, you asked me last week on the Dubcast.
I know,
you said who would be the guy that would have a big spring game that we'd be talking about. And I said DeMario McCall. And that's because I know what kind of explosive athlete he is. We've seen it in little flashes. His speed, his agility, his playmaking ability. He's got that playmaking ability. And you got to think there's got to be a role for him, because we saw what Curtis Samuel did for this offense a couple years ago. They didn't have that last year. And DeMario McCall is the closest thing they've got on the roster to being able to have that Curtis Samuel kind of role. So you've got to think all these offensive minds, Urban Meyer, Ryan Day, Kevin Wilson, Zach Smith, they should be able to figure out a role for DeMario McCall in this offense. The question very well might be, like you said, do they trust him to play a big role the same way they trust a Paris Campbell or a KJ Hill? But to me, you've got to find a way to get him on the field, because he has the potential to add a spark, and I think he will in the return game, but I think on offense as well, he's got the potential to add a little different spark than any of your other receivers are going to provide.
We love the backs, even the guys behind the two big back. You love all of the backs. I mean, that position group is so strong. At receiver, we like what Ben Victor can be, but we haven't seen enough explosiveness out of him. So then when you talk about McCall and even Tate Martell, that's the thing where I keep coming back to, James, is playmakers have to be found. and identified, and the ball needs to get in their hands, and Martell and McCall both come to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think regardless of who wins the starting quarterback job, whether it's Haskins, whether it's Burrow, they're going to have a set package of plays for Martell to get him on the field. Because like we talked about on the show, he's a guy you have to keep happy. He's a guy you have to keep around because behind him, there's not a lot of depth. And you have to imagine if Haskins wins the job, Burrow will go elsewhere. So behind Martell, you don't have a lot of depth. You have Matthew Baldwin, but he's a guy who's probably going to redshirt this year. So you have to keep Martell happy. You have to keep him from transferring as well. So I think he's a guy who's definitely going to seal. McCall is a guy I think personally should have been playing all of last year had he not been injured. I think he's honestly their best option at H-back on this team for whatever reason, whether it's a doghouse, whatever it might be, that hasn't happened. But Martell's a guy who's going to see the field. I think McCall needs to see the field more on offense, Will on special teams. But those are two guys. If you're Urban Meyer, you need a spark, those are two guys you go to.
We're just wrapping up spring, and already you can see the questions starting to come for August. I mean, this is going to be a fascinating team to see indeed. For James and Dan, I'm merely Beau. We'll see you next week.